I've just bought this chuck, which must be the worst chuck, 3-drawer chuck for a lathe ever made. It's just appalling. It's certainly unusable in the form that it was sent to me. It was marketed by somebody in the Czech Republic, and it was referred to as a K11 chuck, but it came without any number markings on it, so it may have been made by the same factory. The first thing that I notice is it's got a Chinese symbol in the corner here. No idea what that means. And immediately I thought, this is a bit weird. The jaws on this chuck are not the normal angle when they close up, and they are 103 degrees. Well, you can see that, 103 degrees. The normal chuck has, all other chucks have 130 degrees, so they meet at a point. So if you take these here, they don't meet at a point. That's just bizarre. Why on earth would somebody do that? So that alerted me to the fact that this was going to be really pretty poor. Then it got worse. When I put the key in, it was almost impossible to turn it. Just turn this out. Move this out. It's incredibly stiff. And I thought the next thing to think was, well, maybe there's swarf and stuff inside, but to my surprise there wasn't any swarf inside worth speaking of. I then turned it over, and the usual arrangement for the back plate here, except it's a plastic insert, which is a bit of a shame. It would have been much better if it was a metal one, but I guess you make the most of what you've got. So we take this bit off, and revealed inside here are the pinions, and I'll cover that one up because that's one that I've just played with, and it's very not easy to see it, but where I've turned this, at this particular point, this pinion here is binding on this part of the bezel, of the bevel gear. So the gap, or rather the the gap, and the thickness of this is not correct for the gear here. This should be wider at the back and narrower at the front. So I thought, well, what do? I can't send it back to China. So I then thought I'd just dismantle the thing completely. It's the same construction you would expect to see. There really isn't much to a chuck, actually. And then if you take these out, you can just see where I've been turning these over. The slightly brighter colour here, where this is worn against the edge of that. Maybe a bit more obvious on this one. But anyway, it's absolutely hopeless. I mean, if you put them in like that and press them in, it's so stiff, it's just impossible. So I then looked at one of them to see what I could do to try and ameliorate it. So you can see inside here, that's all shiny, where I've manually gone in, changed the profile here so that it's the correct profile, or close to. I've removed some material from this part of it so that it doesn't bind on there anymore, and Still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. So that's the next problem. I'll take that one out so you can see the difference between what I've started with and what I've finished with. Actually, I haven't taken a huge amount off, but it's polished out and shaped as best I can with the tools I have to hand. But you can see I've removed material from here, and I've shaved the sides of the gear down at that point, and then polished it. Not perfectly, but I polished it enough to be able to make it work. So I'm now faced with having to do the other two, but I do wonder whether it's going to be worth the effort. So see if I can persuade the gear to come out without having to take the rest of the jaws out. There we go. Looking at this gear a little more closely, there's a sharp edge along the edge here on each surface, and really that should be slightly rounded. So I think what I'm going to do is probably run something over there just to clear the burr off the edge and make it a little bit more rounded. This side of it, surprisingly enough, doesn't look too bad. Now the other thing is, the jaws of this chuck were marked, so that one's marked with a 2. And you can see that just there, and then a part number, and that's marked with a 3, and that's marked with a 1. But they hadn't got any markings inside the chuck here, so once the jaws are taken out you couldn't tell which jaw was fitting in which slot. So again, absolutely hopeless. So I just fitted them in the best way I could for the moment, and I'll play with them to get the optimum position later, and then I'll mark them all properly. So this is just a straightforward piece of cast iron machined out, and you can see here there's a gouge across there, and this is very flimsy bit of plastic, but I don't know whether they come like this now often, but it's just not good at all. So a very poor chuck, to the point where is it really worth trying to rescue it? Well, I suppose. And the other thing is the chuck key, which is absolutely horrible in comparison to the chuck key for the same size that I've got. This is the chuck key off my bison chuck. I mean, there's no comparison there. This is very agricultural. So, a very difficult decision to do. I think what I'll do is I will spend a bit of time, see if I can get this to turn smoothly, and then decide what to do after that. I'll just look now. I can see there's marks in the jaws of the chuck here. There's a mark in the jaw there. Well, I'll film again when I've got these pinions cleaned up and see if I can get them to work better. This is the pin that secures the pinion. Difficult to know whether you can see that, but it is just terrible. It's all rough. It's two different sizes right through it. I mean, it's just awful, 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 awful. The only thing you can say is it has been hardened. And the other thing is, as I discovered, this is running, in this particular one, too close to the inside, so it's binding on the surface there. So this definitely gets worse as I keep looking at things to do, but it is now at least turning over without getting stuck. So I now have a chuck that functions, sort of. It's still quite rough. So I think if I polish up the pinions on this and polish up the bevel gear, it may be possible to use it, but it is pretty horrible. So that's where I've got to.